Good afternoon and welcome to the Prosecuting COVID-19 Related Crimes webinar presentation. My name is Erin Carr. I am the Director of Membership and Marketing with NDAA. We are very thrilled that you are able to join us today for this webinar. We've got some wonderful information that is going to be coming your way. We want to specifically thank our two speakers for the day. Bill Hughes, the Associate Attorney General with the U.S. Department of Justice, and Damon Mosler, Chief Economic Crime Division with the San Diego County District Attorneys Association. For those of you logged in, you have entered in on mute. That way we can control the audio quality of the presentation. We're going to begin in just a moment with a brief PowerPoint presentation. Again, we would like to thank Bill Hughes for joining us, as well as Damon Mosler, who are our speakers. We have a short video to begin.
I'm San Diego County District Attorney Summer Stephan, and I'm here to provide information regarding price gouging at the time of emergency. This is a time where critical needs and prosecutors and our law enforcement come together to protect their lives. This is a pandemic that affected everyone, and sometimes it brings up the worst in people. We see many businesses that overcharge for rents, diagnosed other essential items that are there to be able to exist and to provide for their families. This won't be tolerated, and our office will make this a priority. We have a dedicated consumer protection team that has come together with parliament during this time and set up a hotline to for similar businesses so that we can get voluntary funds, not prioritize the case of the prosecution. We do this in partnership with the Attorney General and with the prosecutor, working on resources together. But they don't have additional stress. It captures them to build their lives. That will be tolerated. And we're here to educate about things about this ability to do this good work that protects our communities. It comes about throughout the United States. Thank you.
I do understand some of you are having some problem with that audio. We will make the video available after the presentation as well. I'm going to go ahead and hand the controls over to our next speaker, and we will verify that he is coming in loud and clear before continuing on. Damon, I'm handing the controls over to you now, and let's make sure that we can see your screen and hear you well. Damon? Damon?
Yes, hi, this is Damon.
Hi, you want to share? There we go. Wonderful. Damon, we hear you well. Thank you so much, Damon.
Fantastic. Thank you, Erin. And thank everybody for attending this webinar on economic crimes related to COVID-19. The area that I'm going to speak about is price gouging, at least to start with. In California, when the governor or if the president declares an emergency, it creates an opportunity for the price gouging statute to become active. And that is, for us in California, Penal Code Section 396. When that happened here in San Diego or in California, we activated our price gouging team. For sadly, we had experience doing this before with some wildfires here in San Diego. So once we activate our team, we go ahead and provide notice to the consumers to let them know what they can expect and what rights they have under the price gouging statute. The statute itself says that upon proclamation of a state of emergency, that vendors or merchants cannot raise their prices more than 10% of what they had been charging prior to the emergency. If their prices go up, though, they get to retain at least a 10% margin plus the markup they originally had. So as you can see, this applies to brick and mortar stores quite a bit. And what we found here in San Diego was that due to scarcity, we started to see a lot of complaints with respect to toilet paper, eggs, hand sanitizer, and masks. Once the price gouging team got organized and together, our media team put out a media alert. And unfortunately, Aaron, I'm not able to advance my slide to show that.
Damon, just control it like you normally would for
okay, there we go. So our office put out public service announcements and bulletins and press releases, and we conducted interviews letting the media know, and they ran stories on that to show what the statute is and what citizens have a right to do. And we did that because we didn't want consumers being victimized by people trying to take advantage of the situation. But we also did not want stores to make a mistake and get themselves charged with such a crime if they knew that it was a crime. So our bulletin looked something like this, and it outlined the legal consequences of Penal Code Section 396, which includes up to a year in custody and a fine of up to $10,000. It also outlined the various protected products, and it included a consumer hotline number that we had pre-existing in San Diego County for our consumer team. I'm not going to give that out now because when we did press conferences, it got released into the public stream up and down the state, and we were getting complaints in other counties, and although we only had jurisdiction for our county. As I outlined before, there are certain products that seem to go crazy in terms of the complaints with respect to scarcity. Once we put out the notice to everybody, we started to get a lot of calls. And on that hotline, we had to clear the calls and have multiple people working on it. So in order to get our whole team to be able to be involved, we had 3 paralegals and 4 attorneys working on this along with a handful of investigators. We developed a tracking sheet in Excel, which was very helpful for us to monitor and keep track of all the complaints. To date, we've had over 340 complaints in less than a month, and each one has had to be looked at. So as you can see by this tracking sheet, we immediately log in when we receive the complaint, what business is being complained about, where they are, and then what the description is of what they've been working on or what the complaining party is talking about. And then we, over time, added a few other categories because we started to see repeat offenders, and we want to be able to prioritize those for evaluation. And then we want to keep track of our investigative reports. So all that's contained within this price gouging tracking sheet that one of my supervising investigators put together. And this really helped us keep track of everything and keep statistics as to how many complaints we got, how many cases we had worked on, whether we referred them to other agencies who might be investigating, and what the final results were, including potential charges. To go over the process and how we go about this is that once the call comes in and they leave a message, we call the reporting party to verify exactly what it is they're complaining about, how they know that, if they knew what the price was before, because that's part of it, we have to determine whether prices had been raised by this particular merchant. Some of the complaints we found were people were misinformed. They said a roll of toilet paper, or excuse me, a roll of paper towels was being charged for $10 at one of our local grocery stores. That's a part of a chain. Turns out that should have been a pack of 6. The one single roll was on the wrong shelf. So this helped us triage and figure out which cases we want to really look at. Then we had our investigators go out and visit the stores or the merchants and verify that those were indeed the prices. And they wanted to see if someone had made a mistake with respect to the shelf, or if there was other things going on with that particular product. So our investigators went out and looked at every store, took pictures, and then if they felt that there was a violation, they presented a warning letter. And the warning letter outlines what the statute is, outlines what our findings were, and tells them that they have to modify their behavior in order not to be prosecuted. And the goal with that was that we wanted to really have compliance. We wanted people to be good citizens. We did not want to have to prosecute store owners for this type of conduct. We felt that if we went out there, we were able to verify, and then in turn provided notice to them that they would become good citizens and behave appropriately. We would go back and follow up to see whether they had changed their prices or not. And if they had not, then we would be issuing a citation. I'm pleased to report that after 55 stores have been visited so far and over a dozen letters served, each of these particular stores has become a better corporate citizen, better citizen for San Diego County, and are doing the right things by way of their customers. As I said, the goal was compliance, not get cases, and we have had good results. Some of these complaints out of the 340 or so went to our city attorney, who handles misdemeanor crimes within the city of San Diego. And some others went to our state attorney general, who set up a platform to investigate online price gouging. What we found was not only were the major online platforms such as Amazon, Walmart, who sell online selling, many people took this as an opportunity to sell things on Amazon or OfferUp or other platforms as a personal salesperson, not having ever been in the business before. So those people, we referred to the Attorney General's office, and they in turn complained to the platforms. The platforms took down a lot of those particular sales of objects. The problem for these online merchants, if you will, or the people trying to take advantage of the situation was, since they had not been in the business before, there was no original pricing that we had to look at or could look at in terms of prosecution. The best thing was to try to just get them not to be on those platforms. In addition, our sheriff's department participated and went out and did some of these orders, and in doing so, they generated some media and some coverage when they arrested some people for selling out of their cars, and that in turn also prevented people from doing it, or at least gave them warning. And we are seeing very few of the online sales, and in the store sales, we're seeing a lot of compliance. So we find that to be very successful. One of the problems with our enforcement, and one of the aspects that was difficult, was if the store owner did not want to cooperate, they did not have to give us their invoices for us to see what their pre-existing price was. Fortunately, the group of people we've met with all did provide us those invoices, and we did see that wholesalers had raised their prices as well, and they're not subject directly to the statute, but there are other civil enforcements that we're in the process of investigating, and our consumer attorneys are going to be looking into filing civil cases against them for this type of behavior. What we now see is a shift away from price gouging now that we have some of the scarcity issues being over, but we're starting to see more scams and frauds, which really wouldn't be gouging, but we are tracking them the same way and pursuing them in the same fashion in order to track all the things that are going on in our county and refer them to the appropriate prosecuting agencies or investigating agencies when it's something beyond our jurisdiction. As a final thing, I've put together a handout that is going to be made available to everybody. That's something you can share with other agencies and with people in your community in terms of cybersecurity tips for working remotely. Since so many of us are under stay-at-home orders and are working remotely, we are using computers in a much different way than we have in the past, and we may not be safe in doing so, either professionally or personally. So this is there for people to have and use to protect themselves. And with that, Erin, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Damon. For those of you who are following along with us, if you look at the side of your controls, you're going to see an option that says handouts. Right now, we've uploaded all of the materials that were made available to us in advance of the presentation, and we are also going to be sending them out afterwards as well, as we know many of you will want this information. Additionally, I know we are already getting a few questions over the system. Please do know that we are logging them and holding them till the end, and the speakers will have some time to answer them. Right now, I'm going to queue up Mr. Bill Hughes to speak next. Bill?
Thank you very much, Erin. I think my slides are loading now. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon. My name is Bill Hughes, and I'm Associate Deputy Attorney General at the Department of Justice. My colleague, Adam Braverman, and I have been tasked by our boss, Deputy Attorney General Jeff Rosen, to coordinate the department's response to the COVID pandemic. And that is what I'm going to discuss with you today. There's plenty to cover, and I'll try to do it as expeditiously as possible. But I first want to thank the National District Attorneys Association for the invitation, and to thank all of you and all of law enforcement at every level of government for what you do. The service to the nation right now is critical. And as we face this pandemic, the Attorney General has made clear to the Department of Justice that our mission must and will continue. We must and will ensure that federal law enforcement operates effectively. The Attorney General has also instructed the department to be vigilant in detecting, investigating, and prosecuting wrongdoing relating to the crisis. It has become one of our highest priorities, and we are making meaningful strides to ensure that wrongdoers attempting to take advantage of these difficult circumstances are brought to justice. Today, I want to cover with you how DOJ has organized itself to meet the law enforcement challenges that this pandemic presents. I'll then cover some categories of illegal conduct we are particularly focused on, and I will touch briefly on DOJ grants, which is an important administrative topic for many, if not all, local jurisdictions. But first, how we are organizing ourselves. We took a couple specific steps when confronting COVID-related crime across the country. The first thing we did was for each of our 94 United States Attorney's offices, we had them designate a COVID-19 coordinator to work closely not only with Maine Justice, but also with state and local authorities on COVID-19 related crimes. That coordinator will serve as a legal advisor for that district on COVID-related law enforcement, provide guidance on the prosecution of COVID-related cases, and conduct public outreach and awareness activities. The public information officers at each U.S. Attorney's office will be able to answer more questions about who the coordinator is in your jurisdiction and how the U.S. Attorney's office can assist you. Secondly, we ensured that all of our litigating divisions at Maine Justice, including the Criminal Division, the Civil Division, and the Antitrust Division, and the National Security Division, are providing support and guidance to U.S. Attorney's offices as they investigate and prosecute COVID-19 related illegal conduct. Third, the department is also working very closely with other federal agencies such as HHS, the Department of Homeland Security and its component FEMA, the Treasury Department, Commerce, and the FTC to ensure that our law enforcement response is consistent with and complementary to the federal government's broader public health efforts with respect to COVID. Lastly, DOJ leadership is very much engaged with these COVID-related efforts. We are ensuring our various components are working together, communicating well, and treating this work like the priority it is. And that's one of the things I focus on most intently. Let me now turn to the Hoarding and Price Gouging Task Force. This was a separate structure we put together following the president's order invoking his statutory authorities under the Defense Production Act. Upon that executive order, the AG established this task force to detect and prosecute illegal hoarding and gouging of certain critical medical supplies. The AG asked Craig Carpenito, the U.S. Attorney for New Jersey, to lead this task force, and I've been working with him closely since he was appointed. And I don't think we could have found a more energized, organized, and driven prosecutor to lead this work. A prosecutor from every single U.S. Attorney's office in the country has been appointed to the task force, and we coordinate closely with the department's litigating divisions and law enforcement components. I should be advancing my slides here, sorry. When pursuing hoarding and price gouging investigations. Lastly, I want to highlight the National Center for Disaster Fraud. As you all well know, it is critical for law enforcement to work with the public to ferret out criminal conduct. The department is directing the public to send all COVID-19 related complaints that they believe need to go to federal law enforcement to a hotline operated by this National Center for Disaster Fraud. If you really remember only one thing from my comments today, it is the number on the screen in front of you, 1-877-720-5721. Please disseminate that and encourage reporting of complaints to federal law enforcement. The public can also email the hotline using the email address disaster@leo.gov. We're also working on a web portal that would be accessible on our website, justice.gov. Calls and emails and other submissions to the NCDF are triaged based on the type of complaint to the proper law enforcement agency for further consideration and, if appropriate, investigation and even other action. That includes referring certain matters to state and local law enforcement when appropriate. Again, you are encouraged to get the word out in your states and communities to send complaints and tips to this hotline. Now I'm going to turn to enforcement. I will discuss a few areas that we are paying particular attention to and the type of conduct that we are already seeing or can expect to see. And I'll start with fraud. Everyone in law enforcement is particularly mindful of fraudulent schemes in this environment. As I'm sure you will agree, it is reprehensible that anyone would use this crisis as an opportunity to profit at another person's expense or otherwise prey on the public. The Department of Justice will not tolerate it. I will cover some of the schemes we are seeing or expecting to see. First, regarding healthcare-related fraud, we are concerned about the following types of schemes. First, involving medical professionals, those offering free COVID-19 testing to obtain Medicare beneficiary information that then is used to submit medical claims for unrelated and unnecessary tests or services, often ones that are never provided. It sounds like someone else's mic is on. If you don't mind turning that off, that'd be helpful. Second, the second scheme is Medicare billing for expensive respiratory tests that do not test for COVID-19. Third is identity theft. This involves telemarketers obtaining the PII of beneficiaries by claiming that they need that information to confirm the eligibility for things like COVID-19 tests. They then use that PII to bill health insurance programs for services or equipment that were never provided or are medically unnecessary. And finally, with the relaxation of Medicare rules pertaining to telemedicine during this crisis, we expect an uptick in schemes involving illegal kickbacks for referrals for telemedicine visits. The criminal division has a healthcare fraud unit, and they have extensive experience in this work in this field and is working with the OIG of HHS to identify and combat emerging trends. The criminal division is also working with the civil division's consumer protection branch and U.S. attorneys' offices who each have healthcare fraud coordinators, all of whom are going to be working together to ensure that prosecutors are aware of emerging trends and are prepared to address them. But it's really the U.S. attorneys' offices that are generally advancing the ball with running these sorts of investigations and bringing cases. And we are already bringing cases. On March 21st, prosecutors filed a civil complaint and request for a TRO in the Western District of Texas against operators of a website called coronavirusmedicalkit.com. The complaint alleged that that site was engaging in a wire fraud scheme seeking to profit from the sale of a purported World Health Organization vaccine kit. That kit that they were purportedly selling, of course, did not exist, and the scheme was designed to steal customer banking and credit card data, among other information. DOJ first got the domain registrar, namecheap.com, to permanently remove the domain coronavirusmedicalkit.com from its system. On March 31st, a district court held a hearing at which the defendant did not appear, of course, and the court issued a preliminary injunction barring the operator from using that domain or any other website that promotes or purports to allow consumers to order vaccines for COVID-19. We are continuing to investigate that matter. In another case, the DOJ worked with British colleagues to stop a scam. On April 1st, prosecutors in the Central District of California charged an individual with introducing an unapproved new drug into interstate and foreign commerce and causing the importation of merchandise contrary to law. That individual shipped dozens of packages labeled Trinity COVID-19 SARS anti-pathogenic treatment from England to Utah. Those shipments were intercepted at LAX airport in Los Angeles, and government medical experts concluded that the chemical contents were dangerous for humans to consume and that there were no FDA-approved applications for such treatments. Because this was clearly a case of peddling a fake COVID-19 cure that contained dangerous ingredients, On March 23rd, UK law enforcement arrested the individual and charged him with analogs of our US drug laws. That person remains in custody. So these are just two examples of the types of cases we've brought so far. And before I turn from healthcare fraud, I wanted to highlight two related problems. The first is regarding fake COVID testing scams. These are particularly challenging. I'll provide an example. In Western Kentucky, people set up a drive-up testing site in a parking lot of a church. They were offering consultations with doctors on FaceTime and quick testing results. The people involved were from outside that jurisdiction and all appeared to have arrived in the area using rental cars. As an initial investigation revealed that almost none of them were medical professionals, and that it also revealed at least a few had prior fraud allegations stemming from other jurisdictions. The United States Attorney's Office and the FBI engaged in a quick investigation, including surveillance and undercover transactions. Observations of these individuals showed that they were not following normal health protocols with how they wore their personal protective equipment, like masks, how they were interacting with patients, and other things. In short, they really didn't look like they were medically trained at all. The doctors on FaceTime turned out all to be licensed medical professionals in Kentucky. However, they happened to be physically located in other states, which seemed to investigators to be too odd to be an innocent coincidence. The group was charging for testing via credit card, taking Medicare beneficiary information and handing out receipts, and instructing drive-in patients that they could expense the charges with their private insurance. This suggested to us that they were pretty sophisticated. The United States Attorney's Office and the FBI worked with the state attorney general to obtain a TRO, but before a TRO could be issued, the people running the so-called testing site packed up and left town, in no small part due to the growing scrutiny the local community was giving them. The press had showed up, local officials showed up to ask them questions, none of which they could answer satisfactorily, and they packed up and left town. We suspect that they just went somewhere else. Maybe they're laying low for a little while, but probably not too long. Perhaps they're moving to your jurisdiction. If not them, possibly someone like them. What is notable here and notable for your purposes is that the local jurisdiction in question did not have any local laws or regulations that required anyone to notify local public health officials about setting up a testing site like this. So local officials were left unaware that this was even going on. They had to find out third hand through word of mouth that someone just set up a testing site within city limits. Ask yourself, would someone be allowed in your jurisdiction to set up a site like this without informing public health authorities? The second additional problem I wanted to highlight is counterfeit personal protective equipment, or PPE. The demand for PPE is extraordinary, and it has created an attractive opportunity for international and domestic bad actors to profit from producing and selling counterfeit PPE. Now, recognizing counterfeit PPE can be difficult, and while the DOJ has not yet put out guidance on how one goes about ensuring PPE is not counterfeit, we are aware that the CDC has put out guidance about how it is possible to recognize certain counterfeit masks. Just get on your internet browser, search for CDC, NIOSH, NIOSH, and the word counterfeit, and the guidance will pop up. You can also visit 3M's website, which offers its own resources on how to spot counterfeit 3M respirators. I will now turn to stimulus-related fraud. As you are undoubtedly aware, the President signed into law the CARES Act, which includes a considerable expenditure of funds to stimulate various sectors of the economy. Applications are coming in now for stimulus funds, and we expect that individuals and businesses may make false statements to the government, and in some instances, the banks, to receive stimulus payments. With respect to stimulus fraud committed by businesses, there are two stimulus programs in particular that we anticipate may be particularly subject to fraudulent schemes. The first entails up to $349 billion in forgivable loans of up to $10 million each to small businesses The purposes of those loans are to permit those small businesses to pay employees during the crisis that they could otherwise not afford to pay. Possible frauds include criminals submitting applications for such loans for non-existent businesses, or applying using stolen business identities, or misusing or diverting loan proceeds, or misrepresenting how those funds were used. All of those schemes are subject to investigation, and if the facts bear out, prosecution. The second program that I'd like to cover is the Economic Stabilization Fund, which encompasses $454 billion to support lending to eligible businesses, states, and municipalities. This program presents the same threat of borrower fraud as the prior program, but it also implicates the threat of public corruption at the state and local level. We may see states or localities materially misrepresenting their financial status to secure loans from this program. We could also see bribes or kickbacks in connection with how states or municipalities disperse any proceeds from loans they receive. If either is the case, and there's evidence of it, state and local officials will be investigated and they will be prosecuted. The department, through its criminal division, has formed an interagency federal working group and is developing methods to detect and deter this fraudulent conduct, and we will be coordinating with those partners as necessary to investigate suspected fraud and prosecute those responsible. So in addition to those borrower type frauds, we also expect fraudsters to engage in various tactics to steal away from consumers money that they received by way of CARES Act payments. Essentially, stimulus funds, the $1,200 you've been reading certain people have been receiving in their bank accounts. We expect, for instance, that many of the same criminal organizations that currently operate IRS imposter schemes or Social Security Administration imposter schemes will modify those scripts to incorporate stimulus-themed inducements. These schemes will likely use robocalls and or live cold calls to contact citizens. If the calls follow the pattern of scams that are generally targeted at elderly, they likely will instruct consumers to pay advanced fees to receive their stimulus payments. Consumers may also receive calls claiming that they were overpaid stimulus money, and a demand will be leveled that the consumer must pay a refund. These consumers may be threatened with adverse consequences such as fines, forfeitures, or arrest if they refused to tender the money. Callers will also likely demand payments not in cash or through the traditional banking system. This is a red flag. They will demand payments by stored value cards, such as iTunes cards, Google Play cards, Steam cards, or money transmission, such as through Western Union or MoneyGram. Fraud schemes may also be using mass mailing campaigns, spam email, or text message campaigns to perpetrate government imposter schemes. These mailings, emails, or texts may provide a website, a phone number, or an email address for consumers to contact to arrange for payments. Falsely promising stimulus payments upon payment of an advance fee or threatening adverse consequences for failure to cooperate with a purported stimulus-related transaction. These fraudulent communications will again seek payment from consumers without providing anything in return. Scammers may also claim to be private companies that will expedite, maximize, or process government stimulus payments for a fee. Some of these schemes will take a victim's money and provide no service. Others will simply misrepresent the services they are able to provide, and others will provide some minimal or administrative service to maintain some veneer of legitimacy. We further expect that some fraud schemes will use smartphone apps or websites that purport to be or to be affiliated with government offices associated with the CARES Act program. These fake sites may claim that consumers must provide personal identifying information, including banking information, to receive stimulus payments. Perpetrators will then use this information to debit money from the consumer's bank accounts, probably by means of remotely created checks. What local law enforcement can do with respect to these crimes, some of which are perpetrated by international criminal syndicates, is simply this: report them immediately to federal law enforcement. I want to cover quickly investment fraud. Many of these schemes target retail investors, including the elderly and other vulnerable victims. A typical scam in this space may include some sales pitch or other false representation that the government, a charitable organization, or other respected entity is either seeking help or promising to disperse grants or loans to COVID victims. DOJ has already begun to pursue prosecutions in this space as well. On March 25th, the FBI arrested a Southern California man on attempted wire fraud charges for soliciting investments in a company he claimed would be used to market pills that would prevent coronavirus infections and an injectable cure for those already suffering from the disease. That prosecution is ongoing. Again, what local law enforcement can do is to help educate its constituency about this type of criminal conduct so they're safer and guarding against it. And again, to report it to federal law enforcement when you all have reason to believe it's going on in your community. All right, I'm going to change topics now to hoarding and price gouging. I first want to make clear that the task force, which I spoke of earlier, has a limited mandate. It is to focus on the medical equipment and supplies, not on all goods. These supplies were listed in a notice published by HHS 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now in the Federal Register. That list includes respirator masks, disinfectants, sanitizers, ventilators, and other PPE, among other medical supplies. Price gouging and hoarding of all other retail goods falls outside of the task force's mandate. Wherever in the country the department receives a tip about illegal hoarding or price gouging of scarce critical medical supplies, that tip is investigated. We have had hundreds of tips referred to us to date. When the department locates a stockpile of PPE, we coordinate with HHS and FEMA to determine whether the stockpile is of the type and quality that they have been acquiring, whether it is outside the supply chain which serves the nation's public health response, and if it is, we help facilitate the acquisition of that stockpile pursuant to the President's authority delegated to HHS and FEMA under the Defense Production Act. Any acquired materials are normally then distributed as directed by HHS and FEMA, which most often ensures that these materials go to the people on the front lines of this war on COVID-19. The primary criminal charge that the task force is looking to apply is 50 U.S.C. 4512. It is found in the Defense Production Act. When the task force determines that a stockpile of these scarce medical supplies is far larger than the accumulator of that stockpile could reasonably use itself, or that the accumulator intends to sell that stockpile in excess of prevailing market prices, we intend to bring criminal charges under this provision. To date, prosecutors with the task force have commenced approximately 140 investigations out of the hundreds of tips we've been sent. These investigations are going on all over the country. And these investigations are starting to bear fruit. On March 30th, the FBI arrested a Brooklyn man after investigating leads that he was price gouging in the sale of PPE. He was arrested at his residence, where FBI confiscated approximately 41,000 N95 masks. The FBI also served him with an order executed by the Secretary of HHS pursuant to the DPA, which compelled the individual to sell his personal protective equipment stockpile to HHS. After receiving that order, the subject voluntarily told the FBI about 6 additional stockpiles in other warehouse locations in New Jersey. He voluntarily disclosed these additional locations, no doubt because the additional criminal liability he faced if he did not turn over the materials to HHS. He was compelled by law, by virtue of this DPA order, to turn over all these materials to HHS. In total, pursuant to this investigation, the FBI and HHS recovered approximately 190,000 N95 masks, 130,000 surgical masks, 600,000 surgical gloves, among other PPE. HHS was able to take immediate possession of these materials, transition them to the possession of state public health agencies that were immediately allowed to get them to the front lines of the public health response in the New York area. These types of investigations don't begin and end with just price gouging, however. They can uncover other acts of criminality, like fraud. Just recently, the department arrested and charged an Atlanta, Georgia resident with fraud for attempting to sell millions of non-existent respirator masks to the Department of Veterans Affairs in exchange for large upfront payments. The complaint alleges that the man made series of fraudulent misrepresentations in an attempt to secure orders from the VA for 125 million face masks and other PPE that would have totaled in value over $750 million at the prices this man was charging. Among other things, the man promised that he could obtain millions of genuine 3M masks from domestic factories when he knew that fulfilling the orders would not be possible. He also made similar false representations to other entities in an effort to enter into other fraudulent agreements to sell PPE to state governments. I ask that you look out for hoarding and price gouging in your jurisdictions. If you find it and it relates to these types of medical supplies, please report it to us. It is important to recognize the seriousness of what hoarding and price gouging means for our national response to this pandemic. But it's also important to recognize that this recently authorized federal tool under the DPA augments what is already a well-established patchwork of state and local laws against hoarding and price gouging that state attorneys general and district attorneys should be familiar with. If you are not familiar with how your municipalities or counties can tackle the problem of hoarding and price gouging at your level, we highly encourage you to become familiar. I'll now quickly turn to national security, although it's obviously a critical and important topic. First, the National Security Division of the department is prioritizing efforts to identify, deter, and prosecute any wrongdoer involved in a terrorist hoax or threat involving COVID-19. And they are working with U.S. attorneys' offices in that regard all over the country. You may have read about the man we charged in Tampa, Florida. He was being arrested for domestic violence when he turned to one of the arresting officers, declared that he was infected with COVID-19, and coughed on that officer. The next day, after he was released from state custody on bond, police were called to the man's residence again, where they were compelled to arrest him again. This time, the man spit on an arresting officer multiple times in the face and mouth. He again claimed to have coronavirus and that he was spreading it around. Although he eventually tested negative for the disease, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Middle District of Florida, in consultation with the National Security Division, charged him with perpetrating a biological weapons hoax. If convicted, he faces as much as 5 years in prison. As you can see, we are taking this type of conduct very seriously. Secondly, the National Security Division and the Criminal Division is also supporting FBI investigations into the increase in malicious cyber activity related to COVID-19, including spear phishing attacks of international health organizations, medical research and equipment companies, and labs and universities conducting vaccine research. These organizations should be mindful of their cybersecurity posture. Relatedly, we are also very concerned that the healthcare sector is vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks, especially ransomware campaigns, which both nation states and criminal organizations could conduct. These organizations should take a serious and long look at their cybersecurity posture. Lastly, with respect to national security, we are also working with FBI, Secret Service, and other law enforcement agencies to identify and disrupt other COVID-related cybercrime threats, including distributed denial of service attacks. I just want to touch on child exploitation quickly. In brief, DOJ is concerned that the changes in daily activity among our citizens during the pandemic, including the fact that many, if not most, children are not going to school, and which results in an increase in internet activity by children and adults, that this has created an increased risk for predatory grooming and the exchange of child sexual exploitation material online. We are monitoring this threat, and including by monitoring chatter on the dark web. And we have seen that these criminals feel comfortable speaking freely about this new opportunity, and that they are having seen a new opportunity here to have more exposure to more children online for longer periods of time, that the grooming and sexploitation which they intend to carry out can happen more intently and over a broader stretch of the population. So these are generalized concerns which we're going to be looking at closely and that you should be aware of as you serve your communities. So in summary, with respect to enforcement, these are just some of the categories of crimes related to COVID-19 that we're focused on. My hope and my request is that you remain vigilant with respect to these crimes and assist federal law enforcement by reporting them either through your local U.S. Attorney's Office, which is a fine way of doing it, or simply by calling the COVID-19 tip line. Now, before I conclude, I wanted to touch briefly on the topic of justice grants, which are an important law enforcement resource for many jurisdictions across the country. On March 31st, the Bureau of Justice Assistance released the grant guidance for the fiscal year 2020 Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Package. This program is modeled after the Byrne Justice Assistance Grant and is thus designed to assist eligible states, units of local government, and tribes in responding to COVID-19. In total, the grant provides $850 million in funding that the department is charged to hand out to state and local entities. With respect to eligibility, any jurisdiction that was declared eligible to receive grant funding under the fiscal year 19 Byrne Justice Assistance Grant will generally be eligible to participate in this COVID-19 related grant program. Allowable projects and purchases include, but are not limited to, equipment, including law enforcement and medical PPE, supplies such as sanitizers, respirators, things like overtime, training, travel expenses, particularly related to the distribution of resources to the most impacted areas by this pandemic. They can also go to addressing the medical needs of inmates and others in state, local, and tribal prisons, jails, and detention centers. The speed with which the Bureau of Justice Assistance is distributing these funds is truly exceptional, and I commend them for their work. For example, the first state applicant provided its application on March 30th, the day the application period opened, showing that it intended to use the full amount for subawards for the purchase of PPE. That application was approved by the end of the week, April 3rd. As a general matter, the Bureau of Justice Assistance is committed to adjudicating applications on a rolling basis in about 7 to 10 days from the date you submit it. Applications should be submitted as soon as possible, and this grant is currently scheduled to close after May 29th. So in conclusion, I have 3 requests from you. First, it's important to educate the public and our fellow government officials about the scams and other illicit conduct out there so Americans can avoid becoming victims, and they can also report it when they see it. Second, if you don't have a good working relationship with your U.S. Attorney's Office, there's no better time to form one. There are COVID-19 coordinators standing by to speak with you. There are hoarding and price gouging task force members ready to speak with you. There are healthcare fraud prosecutors ready to speak with you. Reach out and make those connections. Third, please report and get your communities to report any conduct that should receive law enforcement scrutiny. We want cases referred to us. We will work them hard and as fast as we can. We intend to charge and vigorously prosecute wrongdoers when the facts support it. And this last slide has the contact information you should use if you have any questions for DOJ. These two gentlemen with the state and local law enforcement coordination section will be able to get you to the right people if they don't have the answer to the questions you have. So in conclusion, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I truly believe that when we look back on this crisis, we'll be able to say that it brought out the best in law enforcement, and we are committed to working with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. We're going to be taking questions in just a moment. If you are looking at your control panel, you will notice an option for questions is there. Go ahead and insert that. You can go ahead and type in your questions there. We want to thank Bill and Damon again for joining us today. I'm going to open the line for questions in just and by line, I mean, I will be reading them aloud. My apologies in just a moment. I also wanted to make everyone aware that NDAA has a COVID-19 resource page that is available. It is on our main page, a quick link through ndaa.org/COVID-19. This webinar is highlighted there. It's the materials format will be included as well as including Summer Steffen's video, which I know there were some audio troubles with. Additionally, some of the materials that Damon and Bill referenced, links will be provided there as well. Finally, I wanted to address one of the questions that came through, which I believe addresses the entire general audience regarding CLEs for these COVID-19 webinars. Today's and yesterday's presentations will not have CLE applicability, but ones going forward will. More information for that can be found on the various website pages as information is posted, and also on the COVID-19 page. Finally, if you're not an NDAA member, we encourage you to consider joining at this time. We are providing direct information into members' boxes as frequently as best practices and additional resources become available. Now, to that end, I'm going to go ahead and start opening up some of the questions. Damon, I'm going to bring you back on, as I believe this one was directed specifically at you during your presentation. Is the statute only applicable for those who are selling the items previously, meaning the new sellers, profiteers, would be covered by the statute? Damon?
Yes, initially it was. The governor in California has amended one of his orders to include new sellers, but they're entitled to a certain markup. So it could apply to new entries to the market, but initially the statute really was for original entries because it'd be hard to prove a baseline price.
Thank you, Damon. Next question from Sarah Maynard. How is the quarantine being enforced? I believe that's for both of you.
In California, and in particular in San Diego County, sheriff's deputies and police officers are issuing misdemeanor cites for violation of the governor's orders, and those will be tickets that will get brought to court and evaluated by this office at a later point in time when the court's open.
Thank you, Damon.
And on the federal side of things, I believe, I'm not even sure that there are any active federal quarantines. When this started and the State Department started flying folks out of China, there were a few federal quarantine orders, which, you know, at the time and still today are incredibly rare. The last time the federal quarantine regulations were applied were back in the 60s, I believe. The way and so a federal quarantine order is enforceable by any federal law enforcement officer that has general law enforcement authority. And so what we did is when those individuals landed and were taken to March Air Force Base in California, we first had the marshals provide perimeter security for that site to ensure nobody came in and potentially got infected, and none of those subject to a quarantine order issued by the CDC was allowed to leave. I think those quarantine orders have all expired. I may be incorrect in that regard, but federal law enforcement generally enforces those. We did not have to arrest anyone or charge anyone with violation of a quarantine. Everyone was generally well behaved. But I believe it's a criminal misdemeanor if someone intentionally violates a quarantine order.
Thank you, Bill. Next question is from Elizabeth Sweeney Redder. Is the federal biological hoax statute only available for federal LEO, or can LEO become a victim?
So I'm not an expert on that statute. I don't. My understanding, however, is that it is not a statute that solely protects federal law enforcement officers. In the Brooklyn case, so I think to the extent that someone is threatening other people with COVID, with infecting them with COVID, whether or not they have it, that would fall under the statute, regardless of whether the victims are law enforcement officers or not. It was just under this particular fact pattern that the person that this individual coughed on happened to be the arresting officer. But that's not the only way you can handle it. In the case of the Brooklyn individual who was arrested, and his PPE was seized because he was price gouging. When the FBI originally did a knock and talk, he answered the door, and because he didn't want to talk to the FBI agents, he started coughing in their direction, telling them they had COVID-19. And one of the charges he was arrested on was assault of a federal officer.
Okay, thank you, Bill. From David Ehrenberg, what about hoarding of essential commodities that are non-medical supplies, such as hand sanitizer and toilet paper? Is there anything that can be done to individuals who hoard such essential products, which cause shortages during the state of emergency?
Not in California, no.
Bill?
Yeah, at the federal level, hand sanitizer probably falls within one of the categories identified by HHS as a scarce medical good. However, general retail items are outside of that list, so we would not be in a position to charge anyone with hoarding or price gouging of just general retail items.
Thank you. We're coming up on the 3 o'clock hour. The webinar was intended to last an hour, but I'm going to try to ask a few more questions if everyone wants to stay on the line. From Benjamin Hall, where can we get more information on COVID-19 grants?
That's an excellent question. So go to, and I had this. This is the easiest way. Open up your internet browser and type into the search bar Coronavirus Bureau of Justice Assistance Grant, and I believe the top result or the next top result will be the web page that describes the application. That is the Bureau of Justice Assistance website page for this COVID-19 program, and there will be a button there that says apply here, and you can just click on that. You can also submit questions, and they have other contact information.
Thank you, Bill. I'm going to go ahead and squeeze in one more question before we wrap. I'll make notes of the others that were asked as well. Apologies if this was answered during the presentation, but what law provides federal authorities on price gouging, and can you provide a citation? That is from Todd Leatherman. Yeah,
so this is Title 50, and it starts at it's 50 USC 4501, which is a statute which outlines the president's authority to allocate and to contract for goods in the economy in essentially an emergency situation in the interest of national security. 50 USC 4512 is the prohibition on hoarding or price gouging, and 50 USC 4513 prescribes the criminal penalty, which is $10,000 up to $10,000 per incident, and no more than 1 year incarcerated as a penalty. And that's a penalty for either hoarding or price gouging, or for violating an order issued pursuant to 4511.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you as well, Damon, for your time. We greatly appreciate you making yourselves available to provide this invaluable information. NDAA will be following up with an email after the fact, directing attendees to both a copy of the webinar as well as materials that were referenced during it, and Bill's list of contact information. Please check the NDAA site frequently for updates and resources on the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, we would like to thank both Bill and Damon for their time, as well as their respective offices, the Department of Justice and the San Diego County Prosecutor's Office. Thank you, everyone, for your time today.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.